For the 48th time, so many teams well known around the world in GT racing have assembled again at the epic track, which is the Nürburgring Nordschleife, to compete in the 48th running of the Nürburgring 24 Hours. Also celebrating, remember, its 50th anniversary since the first touring car race for 24 Hours in 1970. The format has changed a great deal since then. Some will say for the better, some will say otherwise, but I think last night's top qualifying session was top entertainment. It was a split session between the non-qualified cars and those that were already guaranteed a space in qualifying, top qualifying 2. And it left us with 17 different machines from 17 teams gunning it out for pole position. In the end, probably quite a few people probably would have banked on Maro Engel sticking in a good lap. He was the only guy to go below the 9-minute marker. That's not particularly fast on a dry lap, but bear in mind it had been raining and the track was only just developing a dry line when the German set his 8:57.884. Perhaps the biggest surprise was that the Octane 126 Ferrari joins it on the front row after a superb lap from the German driver Luca Ludwig, son of Klaus, and he did a 9:02.8. We'll talk more about yesterday's qualifying in due course, but this is 60 minutes of warm-up. The flag was waved, the green flag, about 3 minutes ago. 11:18 local time, Central European summertime. However, looking at the track right now, you can tell it's autumn. The leaves are falling from the trees, and I'm afraid the rain is back. This could be very valuable running ahead of a race which is set, I'm sure, to be affected by precipitation throughout the 24 hours. Welcome again, then. This is RS1, part of the Radio Show Limited network of channels. My name's Johnny Palmer, and we'll be hearing from Peter Snowden, who joined me on Thursday and Friday later on in the day, but a new voice for this weekend at least, but a familiar one on RS1. It's Mr. Nick Damon. Good morning, Nick. Let's try that.
Yes, it's a new box. Good morning, Johnny. Yeah, and of course, I'm a new person to the Nürburgring. This is my first ever actual Nordschleife event where I've worked. I've always done some stuff in the past in the Grand Prix circuit, and I actually have commentated on the virtual Nürburgring 24 Hours, which was held on the same date as the original race should have been. But this is my first chance to really get an idea of this great race, and I think it's very nice of you to break me in gently with just over 100 cars, normally 170. So I think that's very nice of you.
Well, yeah, my grid sheets only stretch to pages 11.
Yes.
Yeah, so all the quick guys on page 1, and how many have we got on the final page? 3 cars, 95th, 96th, 97th. I expect you to have learnt all the driver names and the car types by the end of this 60 minutes.
Well, luckily, a lot of the driver names are very familiar, because we see them in all other series, from the top of the World Endurance Championship to the Creventic series and everything in between. However, I have been doing some homework, and I'm going to act the, how can I say this? I'm going to act the audience here because I have some questions.
Yeah,
I
that's
have
all right.
some questions.
No problem.
And my first question is going to be unsurprisingly about the class system. Not in Victorian London, but at the Nürburgring. Can you explain to me how the same car can be in 3 different classes?
You mean like a GT4 car, which appears in SP10?
Or a Porsche Cayman appears to be in 3 different classes.
Yes, it can. Yeah, and some of that's down to tyres, because, for instance, Cup 3 has all Caymans in it, but they're on a spec Michelin tyre, I think it is, whereas if you change tyre supplier, you are automatically put into another class, and there may be little tweaks to the ECU and weight, quite possibly. For instance, Alex Brundle, who we'll be hearing from this weekend, raced a effectively GT4 Aston Martin last year, won the class, but he wasn't in the SRO, Stefan Rattel organisation, GT4 organisation. So they're not homologated GT4 cars. They are, in fact, adjusted. And Alex, I think, will probably tell us the finer details, but maybe a bit of aero change as well, which would put you into then either SP8 non-turbocharged cars or SP8T turbocharged.
Now that's fantastic. Now there's the T sorted out. This is going to be a long-running theme, because I recognise the cars, I recognise the drivers, I recognise the track these days even. But yeah, I was spending a lot of time yesterday going through. What? I know it. Oh, yeah, okay. As you do, and as you go through an event with 100 cars. But yeah, I mean, it's a spectacular event, and I think realistically, I feel very privileged on getting rain as well, because I wouldn't want a dry event, because that would be the Nürburgring. I'm hoping for snow, but no fog, because I don't want to have to stop.
No, and we have had ice on the track in May. What was that, 4 years ago? And the race had to be stopped because it was so slippery. We had GT3 cars with immense amounts of power, just not able to go up the hill towards the carousel because their rear wheels were spinning and they were actually going backwards rather than forwards. So that was one of those moments, sort of straight out of Question of Sport, what happened next. I don't think we're going to... Well, temperature's pretty cool. Yesterday, didn't get above 8 degrees Celsius as a high. And I think similar today as well. There's been a significant change of wind direction. It's all coming down from Greenland now, I hear. So midweek, I think, across the whole of Europe, beautiful. Monday, Tuesday, late 20s, early 30s, and now this massive shift. So it'll just all go together again to add this weird combination that we often get at the Nürburgring 24 hours.
So you've had 2 days looking at the track and looking at the surface and seeing what's going on at the various events. So give me your summation of how the first couple of days have gone.
The GT3s are obviously very finely balanced, and Peter and I were trying to work out what's the strongest chassis around here. But I think because the Nürburgring offers you every single type of corner, you've got that incredibly long straight at the end of the lap as well to potentially slipstream. I thought the BMWs were going to be strong. We had some good times early on in qualifying yesterday from the Beamers, but then the Mercedes locked out 3 of the top 4 positions on the grid. So I think Mercedes-Benz with their 2020 spec AMG looked very strong. Ferrari was a surprise to me to be on the front row. Not sure whether they continue that pace across all 4 drivers, but Luca Ludwig has certainly stamped his authority on the event as a bit of a star. And yeah, the BMWs are there for Rover and for Schnitzer, kind of just outside the front 2 rows. So I'm still trying to surmise across the weekend. There's so many different elements, and the changeable weather conditions are going to be a nightmare. But for those that are well experienced about this place, they just have this 6th sense to be able to judge the conditions before they've even arrived into them. And when we were doing qualifying yesterday, you consider that at the speeds we were doing, 9-10 minute laps, the chance of the weather being very, very different at the same corner just a lap later was so high. So I don't know. I have no clue. Can you tell?
Yeah, well, the question, my subsidiary question was studying it. So how come both the Audis and the Porsches did so badly in qualifying? And does qualifying really matter as an indicator? Obviously, it doesn't in 24 hours as positional, but is it indicative of their race pace anyway?
I think you've got to look at the fact that there are 9 key Porsche drivers not even here because of COVID-19. So 9 drivers that were in action at Le Mans last week, not able to take part this weekend. However, the B team, as we were calling it at KCMG, and that's purely because 3 drivers that are brought in as substitutes have the surname beginning with the letter B: Earl Bamber, Timo Bernhardt, Jörg Bergmeister.
Not really substitutes, are they?
No, I said to Peter, it's a great bench to call from, isn't it?
Another B.
So, yeah, I don't know whether they were focusing more so on how they're going to go across the 24 hours. Porsche had a dreadful weekend last weekend at Le Mans in the GTE category. But there's no reason why that should continue on into this GT3 field, because we must remember that at Le Mans, it's a brand new car, the RSR 19, and they're in year 1 of that. Aston Martin, who won the race, were in year 3, so it's a long old process to be successful at Circuit de la Sarthe. Porsche's a strong car, and you know, it's a Bathurst 12-hour winner 2019. So I'm not sure. Where did the best placed Porsche on the grid finish? 14th? Yes. And that was the Fricadelli car with the KCMGs further down. So Dennis Olsen didn't really feature because on his second lap, remember, he had to pre-qualify for qualifying 2, and when he actually got to qualifying 2, the car broke down at Callanhard. Right. So he never got a lap from the Norwegian. It could have been a better story from him had he managed to do those 2 laps. But the Mercedes looked really strong. And it's just a question of staying out of trouble. What I didn't expect is that the number 2 Mercedes have such a huge shunt at Schwedenkreuz on Thursday night with Jelmer Berman at the wheel, who never makes any mistakes. We actually think that probably wasn't a mistake from the Dutchman, and he caught some traffic going into the really fast left-hander before Arenberg, and you dive under the bridge and head down into Foxhole. But I mean, that Mercedes practically a write-off. They had to source a new chassis, and the number 2 car is a new machine than the one they started the weekend with. Fabian Schiller driving the number 9 Mercedes. This is the one that qualified 3rd when Raffaele Marciello did the time of a 9:03.1, and Raffaele started 16th of the 17-car field that got into Q2 late last night. Car almost taking off there early on in the lap, which is the 44 Porsche with Klaus Bachler at the wheel. We were discussing, Nick, before we came on air, that you've done a number of virtual laps around this place.
Yeah.
And
not enough.
You sort of know the track, but when you get around Brunchen and Flansgarten, I always think, I've done this bit already. I'm sure I have.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching a bit of the coverage yesterday, mostly actually just to try and pick up the cameras and the on-car, just to try and work out where we are, which is obviously normally on a normal race circuit. Even a 13-kilometre one like Le Mans isn't an issue. You need 2 seconds, you know where you are. Obviously, there are standout parts of the Nürburgring which you can recognise instantly, and not just the carousel, but other parts of the track when you've done a few laps virtually or for real, you get them. But there is a whole section, you're absolutely right, Johnny, towards the back end of the circuit, really from Wifferman until you get to Flatsgarten, which just seems to be the same but different, if that makes sense. And you're going around, no, is that one? No, oh no, two. I mean, obviously the drivers themselves have no issue with that. They know exactly where they are, but just us poor commentators can place them several corners away from where they actually should have been. But it's an amazingly complex circuit. I think the point you make very clearly is they're actually quite lucky at the moment because the whole track is actually similarly wet. You know, there's been a nice dumping of rain all over the massive square mile, square kilometrage of the circuit, and so it's all nice and damp, so you haven't got a situation where you're wondering what's coming next corner, because you know it's just going to be this level of wet. And looking at it as we have now down for the last 10 minutes or so, it doesn't actually even seem that there are any parts which are particularly super damp. You know, it seems to be the same level of spray wherever you go, just depending on speed. There are obviously slightly different surfaces around. And this is a positive thing. All wet, all dry, that's great. The problem is when half of it's soaking wet and half of it's dry, or you've got things in the middle, because that's going to catch you out, not just on time-wise, but obviously with potential for accidents and incident.
The other thing we shouldn't forget is the very, very late tyre choice for everybody ahead of the qualifying session that determined the top 10 rows or 12 rows or so, because you had this changeable condition. It had been raining, it was then stopped raining, and it was a question of how much of the track is now dry and how much is still wet enough for cut slicks or indeed full wet pattern tyres. Now, I don't think anybody went and succeeded with a good lap time with fully grooved tyres and decided in the end there are 2 separate stages of intermediate that you can do, and the tyre manufacturers themselves will cut the slick for those appropriate conditions. Now, Audi, 2 of the Audis, Mirko Bortolotti and Chris Mies, came into the pits and actually changed their tyres partway through the session. Augusto Farfus did exactly the same as well. That's how late they wanted to leave it. And just reading 1 or 2 bits after the session, it looks like Porsche might have gone with the wrong top. Audi certainly did. There's no question about that. Porsche, not many cars in top qualifying to start with, and then the Dennis Olsen issue, of course, as well. BMW with decent pace, as I said, and then Mercedes locking out 3 of the top 4 positions. So I don't think we can necessarily read an awful lot into qualifying because of the conditions that it was held in. Big wiggle there for Matthias Bergverment. Coming out of the second of the 2 carousels with Porsche Cayman GT4 Club Sport. That is one of 3 alternatively fueled cars. So they run in the AT category. You can write that down.
Thank you. Alternative fuel. How is it alternatively fueled?
It is a bio
petrol. It won't be diesel, will it?
No, it's petrol.
So it's 100% made from plants.
I believe so. This is a car or a team rather called 4 Motors Bio Concept car, and they have a Cayman and a 911 GT3, not a GT3R, but a GT3 Cup car. So you've got 420 is the Cayman, car 320 is the 911, and we are due to have a Ford Mustang as well. However, its engine got launched very early on in the weekend, and it ended up dropping a load of fluid on the Grand Prix circuit. Thankfully, nobody spun as a result of that. I don't know where the Ford Mustang is in terms of its repair process, but I really hope that can make the start later on today.
Have you had any cars scratch?
The 2 came close, but as I said, they sourced a different chassis, and that is back in the race. Searching the Rolodex in my brain, I can't think of anybody else who's actually out for good. There are 1 or 2 on the entry list, making it initially a 99 car entry list that have dropped away, but I don't think they featured in any of the sessions actually. And 97 cars qualified through the course of the standard 3 qualifying sessions, 2 of which we had on Thursday, 1 yesterday morning, and then top qualifying yesterday night.
That could be quite disappointing.
Go on.
I don't think this is going to be the most cars ever in a race I've been involved in. Do you remember there were 99 at Dubai once?
Yes.
On that 2.8 mile circuit.
I do.
And now there's 97 on 14 miles.
Believe it or not, we've never, through the history of the Nürburgring 24 Hours, had fewer than 100 finishers, let alone starters. So, I mean, unfortunately, this is breaking all the records and in the wrong possible sense, but we kind of all know the reasons why.
Not short of entries, though, let's be honest.
No, and we shouldn't complain.
We haven't got to sit around going, I can't believe it's only 97. But it's, I mean, I just think it's really great, because with 170, there's probably another 11 class setups to think of.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we've still got the scope for witnessing this race for 6 or 7 hours, and by the 8th hour, I spot a car that I didn't even know was in the race.
I'll be doing that at the 25th hour.
There's just that classic moment.
Yeah, you'll do post-race tech and go, they're in the race? What?
I'm convinced at certain years that they just throw more cars out there at half distance just to make it more interesting.
What, Hans Hires out there, is he? Just
there
driving in from the side.
Exactly, yeah.
I know basically Kennett's driving in one of the AMGs, but yeah, so...
he is. He is indeed.
Perhaps we could talk about the Hans Hire story one day. It's fantastic.
Yes, I mean, it's been much documented, but every excuse, if you've not already heard it, to roll it out again, probably at about 11 or 12 o'clock tonight.
Well, I'm going for 2 in the morning.
Fine. Nick Damon, Johnny Palmer on RS1, part of the Radio Show Limited network of channels. You are listening to Warm Up for the Nürburgring 24 Hours. It's 48th edition, and delighted to say that a third voice for this segment of the day is Paul Truswell from the Woking Data Centre. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Johnny. Nice to be with you. And yeah, just reflecting on a number of things that you and Nick have been saying there. I'll start off with the 97, shall I? 97 starters, you suggested.
Yes.
Be getting.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we're going to split them into 2 starting groups. That 2 is a first, certainly in my recollection of Nürburgring 24 Hours. Traditionally, they start the Nürburgring 24 Hours with 3 starting groups. Roughly 50 is their kind of maximum number for each starting group, but they'll adjust it as required. But for this year's event, with less than 100 starters, rather than forcing 3 smaller start groups, they're going to actually do the whole thing with just 2 start groups. What I haven't got is what the gap will be, whether they'll extend the gap between the 2 starting groups. And the starting groups are important because the elapsed time, bizarre things amongst many that happens at the Nürburgring 24 Hours, the elapsed time for starting group 2 starts at the time that their pole position man crosses the start-finish line at the start of the race. So you get this bizarre situation where some of the cars who start in Group 2, although they may be behind on the road, the Group 1 cars, they may be ahead of them in terms of their elapsed time. And that can throw us, again, Johnny, as you were saying, 8 hours, 9 hours into the race when it's sort of getting towards supper time and you really want to go to sleep. And then you have to work out why this car is suddenly jumping up and down the order, and it's purely because of the way that the timing works for the people who start in starting Group 2. So be aware of that the cars will have to start in 2 groups rather than 3. Starting at the back of starting Group 1 is going to be the number 44 Falcon Tyres Porsche, which committed something of an indiscretion in one of the qualifying sessions, not slowing down sufficiently for a caution flag, and so they're going to be starting from the back of that group, but not as bad as the car collection Audi, which is going to be starting from the pit lane, and also without Miroslav Konopka on their driving strength, because Miroslav has had his wrists well and truly slapped for doing 120 kilometers an hour. Or something over that. I think
it was 215 kph through double waved yellow flags. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So he's had his license taken away and has been sent away with his tail very firmly between his legs. But that car will continue just without Miroslav on the driving strength. That's the car collection Audi number 8, I think.
7.
7, thank you. So that's starting group order. The other thing you were talking about, we just have a little summary of what happened in qualifying. And I'm indebted to Bianca Leppert of Sport Auto, who summarised the qualifying in about about 147 characters yesterday. Audi, wrong tyre choice. Porsche, not many cars in the top quali, and then the one that they did have that had any chance had a technical defect. BMW, good. Ferrari, surprised, but has been strong in the NLS. Mercedes, strong and made profit of mistakes from the others. I'll kind of go along with that. And the thing which wasn't mentioned there, but will be very significant for the race, and be interested in hearing what you, Johnny, and Nick have to say on this. Of course, it's not just about one fast lap, it's about 4 drivers in most cases across the team. So I invite you to just look at some of those 4 driver lineups and pick the one without a weak link, because it's the strength across the 4 drivers of the team which really makes a difference in the Nürburgring 24 hours.
Yes, and so much of it, I think, is down to experience of this place in changeable weather conditions with so many different cars out on track. I mean, it's going to be some quieter stints, you would argue, with only the 97 starters. The chance, therefore, for maybe some quicker laps as well, and perhaps, Paul, a record distance, because you would think fewer cars, less incidents, less code 60, code 120, and an opportunity to go further than we ever had.
If only the weather were a little bit better.
True.
Yeah, I think certainly listening to what you were saying there about the weather at the moment, and looking at the not terribly reliable weather forecast that I have, but it certainly doesn't look like it's going to be that good. And reflecting back on something that I mentioned yesterday, even during the qualifying sessions yesterday, when it was damp, about the same as it is now, but we're still over a minute slower than what would be a good lap time in dry conditions. And the problem with the Nürburgring is you just can't push without leaving a little bit of a margin. You don't know what's just around the next corner. As Nick was saying, when you do the Nürburgring on a simulator, so much of it is blind, and there can be a service vehicle on the track up ahead, can be another car having a problem up ahead. So you do just need to leave that little bit of leeway, a little bit of margin when you're going around to make sure that nothing untoward happens.
The weather forecast from the track, incidentally, here's the summary for Saturday. Very cold and unsettled weather with fresh, gusty westerly to northwesterly winds, blowing mainly clouds and single rain showers over the ring. Only little sunshine and the maximum of 8 degrees, which I was describing earlier on. So pretty strong winds, hopefully blowing the weather systems, the rainy weather systems away. But I think we're just going to be welcoming new rain showers in. And for Sunday, sky's going to be often covered the whole day with showers during the morning, with winds as high as 30 kph and a maximum temperature of 13 degrees. So it's going to be in and out showers, and I can't really see a break in the weather before the checkered flag at 3:30 on Sunday. So actually this session, the warm-up session, Nick, becomes very valuable, because we haven't had a great deal of fully wet track. You do wonder how much you've got to lose in one of these sessions with race start mere hours away, but I think it's wise to be out there.
Oh yeah, I think 100%. You know, you're learning all the time, and certainly in a, you know, in this situation whether we look like we're going to get. So what's the opposite of set fair? Set wet. You know, this is the condition you're going to be out there in, so it's completely valuable information for what's going to be happening in both 3 or 4 hours time when the race starts. More importantly, when you get to the similar time of day later on, it certainly isn't that half-hour warm-up where nothing good can happen. It's that half-hour, to hour-long warm-up where you're probably going to learn more now than you've learned in all the previous qualifying sessions. Now, the only downside is because the laps are so long, you can't rotate your drivers that easily. You know, in and out is 20 minutes. So it may well be that most of the teams will probably run with just one driver and look to set up. A couple might run two, but yeah, it's a real challenge, and you know, you sit there going, well, yeah, it's a long track, but it's just like, you know, sticking 5 together. So what's the difference? Well, it's not though. It's not only is the remembrance, but of course those different tracks and different surfaces are approached in a very different way, because it kind of, you stick things together. And also, of course, the key point about it is it is so narrow. There is, as Paul was saying, you know, in the raging dry, you have to leave a margin for error. In the wet, you have to leave a double-spaced margin, because otherwise, you slide slightly. Normally, I've got myself, I'm on wet grass in the barrier, I've broken it. Yep. I've got the other way. I'm now on a completely different surface. I'm pointing in the wrong direction. It was a track that was designed and built, prior to the Second World War, I don't believe that much of the Nordschleife has been widened. They have put curbs on it and they have put barriers around it, but the actual grey stuff is not any wider than it was when, Caracciola was going around it before he got the carousel named after him. Yeah, yes, you get a nice sort of reprise, nice sort of relief with the Grand Prix circuit where you can see where you're going. It's lovely and wide, but then you've got 8 minutes more of effectively hanging on for dear life whilst going as quickly as possible. I'm quite impressed. We've seen some good onboards here. And you can see that the drivers know that some areas you don't touch. They're staying on some of the curbs. There is grasscrete on the exit of quite a few corners, and that is surprisingly gripping. And in fact, we just had a shot earlier of Martin Ragginger going around, and you could see that he was actually going across the curb to get to the grasscrete. So he was going wider. Right. So he wasn't actually running the car along the curb. He was going, no, I'll go even wider than that. I'll go outside. So I don't suppose there's much track limit worry here, because on the whole, if you abuse track limits, you've hit a barrier.
Yes.
But he was saying, well, the curb might be the best line, but actually the grasscrete is better than just the tarmac and has more grip.
Yeah, the track limits around here at this place are sort of self-policing because, as you say, you've got mere feet in places between the white line at the edge of the track and something very hard indeed, like an Armco barrier or worse, concrete. So drivers that have spent many seasons around there, whether that be through the years of their VLN experience on into NLS this season or through a number of Nürburgring 24 hours, then they know that little bit of margin of error you've got to work into it. And yes, stay off the curbs during the wet. We were having an in-depth discussion about that with Peter Snowden yesterday. Also for me, the concrete sections are a worry in the rain. The carousel itself, the Kleiner carousel later on in the lap. Yes, you've got massive camber in your favour, but it's still like ice, surely, those concrete paving slabs?
I think looking at the cars going around this morning, it seems much more likely that the benefit of the wonderful world of gravity and centripetal force is outweighing the fact that concrete looks lethal. Also, it is concrete that is rough as heck. It's not lovely smooth stuff you get laid down when you're just
in a pit lane or whatever. It's
true. Had a lot of weathering. So it's quite rough. It's probably like that stuff you get on the motorway. You know that stuff on the motorway, you're driving along nicely and suddenly it goes to concrete and your road noise goes from 10 to 475 decibels. And it kind of shocks you, wakes you up, and your wife or significant other turns in, what are you doing? I'm just driving on the road.
It's not me, it's a road surface. They changed it.
You always say that.
I didn't realise you were married to a Monty Python character, but I like it.
Yeah. Luckily, she never listens.
30 minutes to go, so we're halfway through warm-up. It's Saturday morning at the Nürburgring Nordschleife, and Martin Ragginger is about to complete a lap. It's going to be just under 10 minutes, I think. Yes, it will be, but only just a 9:56.2 for the Austrian. And remember that during warm-up, we're back into the format of a choice at the end of the Grand Prix lap. You've got three choices. You can either go left onto the Nordschleife, you can go right into the pit lane, or you can stay in the middle and do another lap of the Grand Prix circuit. That's the reason why, as Ragginger completed his lap, there was a Lamborghini Huracan feeding its way in the other side of the cones. Then
I take it that's just for practice, not the race.
To continue your motorway analogy.
I'll do a Joker lap.
Yeah. Well, it's like a contraflow.
Yeah.
And it's only in place, thankfully, for the practice sessions and warm-up. They took it away for quali last night, and yeah, as you're absolutely right, it's not in place for the race. Otherwise,
that'd be great, wouldn't it? I've done 700 laps. Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is when you do a Grand Prix lap in the race, it doesn't count. They just strike it from your tally. And what this format prevents you from doing is coming off the Nordschleife and straight into the pits. You've got to go all around the Grand Prix circuit and duck in via the back door. That's no good in the race when you're looking to do 7 or 8 lap stints.
So how is the pit lane working? I've also seen some of the diagrams for the VLN. Are they fueling out the back, or are they using the pumps as per normal?
See, up until about Friday, I was still undecided as to that because it looked very, very busy in the pit lane, particularly in this session. But Paul Truswell's seen some maps issued by the race control team and clerk of the course and the organisers, and there is, Paul, a quadrant towards the back then for the back of the paddock for refueling?
No, the refueling is traditionally done the way it always is done at the 24 hours. So using the pumps in front of the pit garages. The maps and layout drawings, which I looked at yesterday evening, are more to do with the way that the paddock is laid out. So we're not in the NLS version where they do this kind of roundabout through the paddock area. So they're coming into the pit, straight down the pit lane. If they want to work on the cars, they can push them back into the garages. But they are somewhat constrained by where they work within the garages. And some teams will be pushing their cars right the way through the garage and out at the back in order to be able to work on them should they have to. Not really obviously what they want to do during the race. But no, to answer Nick's question, it's a normal Nürburgring 24 layout, not a 2020 NLS layout.
Right. Yes. Thank you for confirming that, because that's sort of always what I thought, and then a significant bit of doubt was put into my mind after various conversations on Friday. But okay, so everybody in the pit lane as normal. Fueling takes place. There is massive inconsistency. I say massive. There's a small bit of inconsistency between the nozzle speed of the fueling, and this is what we sort of thing we see in Creventic as well. Now, to mitigate that, you're given a minimum pit stop reference time, which you cannot go quicker than. So it's not about necessarily the speed in the pits, because they try and govern how quickly that fuel goes in. However, it is a sliding scale. So your minimum pit stop reference time depends on how many laps you've just done.
Right.
So you can have a quickish pit stop if you've just done 6-lap stint. It's longer if you've done 8 laps.
Fine. Yeah.
The problem is 70 minutes from the end, your reference point is no longer the stint you've just done, but how long of the race there's still to go.
So a full tank stint in the dry, is that 70 minutes?
Yes, says Paul in my ears. Yes, it is.
Right.
And that's equivalent to 8 laps in the dry. You might be able to squeeze. Yeah, I'm not sure you'll be able to squeeze it to 9 laps in a GT3 car, even if it is wet. Not sure we've seen that in VLN and NLS races in the past. Go on, Paul.
If there's some slow zone, if there's a lot of yellow flag around the circuit, then 9 laps is not out of the question for a full GT3. And certainly, as you were almost got the chance to say, Johnny, certainly is going to be well possible if you're in an SP7 or an SP8 8T car.
Yeah. Lars Kern really struggling to get the car turned in at certain points on the lap here. This is a guy who has done development work for Porsche. He's no mug, and several different steering inputs there just to get the car rotated, Nick.
He's either got, he's got a very low ratio rack, or what he's actually got is terminal understeer.
Yeah.
He's going away, and you can just see him. He's just soaring away, just trying to get a little bit of a front end bite. Obviously, he's not really slowing down, so he's not too concerned about it. I assume what we're not seeing is a little bit of magic on the brake pedal as well, just to tuck the nose in. But he is. Once he's got some speed up, so once he's got a bit of aero on the car, he's having a much better time. But of course, a vast number of these quite tight turns at the Nürburgring are taken at relatively low speed before you're getting a lot of help from the downforce, and it was very noticeable. I mean, obviously, in a wet track, you are always going to have one end of the car not gripping so well, and with the Porsches, with all that weight over the back and all that drive they get, it is the front end that's unloaded, which, in fairness, is probably okay, because you can certainly control a bit of understeer easier than snap oversteer.
Yes.
In the wet, but it does obviously take your time. Well, what it doesn't do, of course, oversteer in the dry is an absolute tyre killer. In the wet, it's not so much, because you're not getting that. The reason you're understeer is you're not getting that temperature into the tyres. So you're not actually then scraping away the surface, boiling it up and wearing it out. You're just basically slipping. Because of a lack of grip rather than a lack of ability to move the car in the direction you want it to do. It's down to, I suppose you'd say, rather than the frictional grip not being there. So it's the frictional grip that's not there rather than the chemical grip not being there. Because everyone knows there's 3 types of grip: friction, chemical, and aero. And those are 3 ways you get grip out of a tyre. The interesting thing is that if everyone's absolutely honest, no one actually understands how the chemical grip works.
Not even the tyre manufacturer?
No, they've done it by trial and error, but they can't actually explain it.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
It's like magic.
Yeah.
Magic, because what happens, of course, is bits of the tyre will bond and then debond with the surface itself. That's when you talk about compound. We all understand how friction works, we establish every day. And we can understand aero, you're just pushing it down, you get more pushing it. But the chemical grip is magic.
There's a problem for the 165 Hyundai here, which is the i30 Fastback N. John Hindhaugh and I went to Spa recently for the ELMS in one of the fastback machines. Really nice road car.
It sounded like a race car.
Yeah, it did.
He said, so come and see this. All right, fair enough then. And he just put it on race mode.
Yeah, proper Burmley exhaust.
What was really impressive, though, he actually parked it nowhere near his house.
Okay.
It was like down. So I'm going to annoy these neighbours, not my neighbours.
Oh, I see. Yeah, well, that's very wise, I think for future relationships.
I think it's because there are several fans out in front because of some work that's been done. But it's a course car on the track.
Yeah, that's something else to get used to, by the way. Nick Damon, I'll remind you, is new to the Nürburgring 24 Hours and NLS races as well. So get used to that, because if we do have any Armco barrier damage through the course of the race, there'll be full-on 7.5-ton lorries out on the racetrack to deliver new parts of Armco amongst the race cars.
With wave yellow, as I take it.
Oh, yes, and a sort of moving Code 60 as well. The Marshals did an incredibly an amazing job, actually, to be able to police all of that and put in and out the speed limits that are constantly changing in those situations. Visibility, not only at a premium because of the spray, but there is now a very heavy mist around the Grand Prix track. No stranger to the Eifel Mountains region, this type of weather. But again, I mean, this is nothing to do with the amount of cars running around the Grand Prix track. It's just low cloud. And then the amount of rain, perhaps, that's coming down as well. But, yeah, I wouldn't fancy being out there right now. Still got 22 minutes to go of the session. But then again, when visibility is so tough at this end of the track, you could be at the north side, at Exmuller, Bergwerk, right side, and it's all right. It's still raining, but at least you can see the road in front of you.
Yeah, in fact, there's going to be a bit where it's harder to see. The Grand Prix track is where you choose it, wouldn't it, really, with your lovely gravel runoffs and large amounts of tarmac. But yeah, I think there's some water hanging in the air, I think, from the 90 cars going around. Obviously, as you say, there's some people using short laps, so actually the Grand Prix circuit is getting used more in many ways. It's quite interesting. We've got in fact, anyone can get it. There's a GPS tracker. And if you look at it, there's constantly about 50 cars looping around the Grand Prix track, but only about 40 or 30 actually bothering to do the entire lap. So, yeah, that's very obviously, that is a very safe thing to do, because you've only got an hour. You don't want to lose a car. You don't have an accident. You know that you can work out some settings on the Grand Prix track, even though the tarmac is slightly different. With the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to slide off into the gravel. Not the worst thing happening, you're going to slide it into the barrier. So it's an interesting option to have. And I think if I'm really, really honest with you, probably one I would take. I might send my driver out for one sighting lap of the main track and say, what's it like? Are there any bits and bobs? And then, yeah, the rest of it, anything else we need to do, we'll just do it on the safe loop. Let's call it that.
The 165 car is being recovered. That's the reason why there was a course vehicle out on track, and Marcus Lungstaus has had that difficulty with the fastback. No damage on the car as far as I could see it. Just ground to a halt on the Grand Prix circuit. He's sharing that car with Mark Eret, Marcus Wilhart and Kai Jordan. Yes, if you didn't know about the app, which only talks to Apple products, sadly, so it's not an Android app, but nevertheless really useful if you have got an iPad and whatnot. If you search the Apple Store and type in GPS Auge, A-U-G-E, make sure that's one word, space, racing space app, GPS Auge racing app, it should pop up, and it's free, isn't it?
Yeah, it's free. You have to download that, then you have to download, make sure you're on Wi-Fi, because the track, unsurprisingly, is a very big download.
Yeah.
You can then follow all the cars on GPS as a big map, or you can actually then select individual cars. Well, I think you select higher individual cars when you press the button. Let's have a look. It just gives you information about the cars, and it highlights them as well. So yeah, it's a really, really good. The thing that Johnny has shown me, it's great.
Yeah, I think there are ways of zooming in onto a particular car though as well. It'll tell you where it is on the racetrack currently. It'll tell you its speed as well, and
it's
float
amazing.
around.
I now know exactly how fast the Audi Sport car is going. It's going 140 kilometers an hour.
There you go. And the other really useful thing is, if we do have a code 60 out on track, you can configure it so that it will automatically zoom into that bit of the track. The difficulty is when we have 3 or 4 code 60s in different places, but that will draw my focus, certainly, if there's an incident which requires a speed limit. And a reminder that when there are incidents, it's a progressive slowdown. So your first warning is a single waved yellow, then into double waved yellow, then into code 120, and then into code 60 past the incident, and then after that, obviously, you get a green flag and you can overtake again. What that does, though, is that when you're restricted to just no overtaking but no speed limit as such, if you're a GT3 car caught behind a Renault Clio and it's going half your speed, you can't pass it. And the guy behind you in a GT3 car then can get right on your back bumper when the gap previously was 10 seconds. So fluctuation of gaps is huge across the race. And just because we might think, oh, well, there's no chance of that car being caught in this stint because it's 30 seconds up the road. No, we need to keep our eyes trained on the timing screen, because in 25 Ks, it can be a different race.
Yes.
So
always remember, 1 lap is equivalent to many sprint races at Thruxton or any other local UK circuit. It's the same as the entire race, it's just 1 lap.
Yeah, I mean, it's just about a 16-mile lap, this. And bear in mind as well, at the start of the race, you're not permitted to stop for fuel before you've completed 5 of those laps. So it's about 80 miles before you might want to put some fuel in it. But bear in mind, you can normally do 8 laps in the dry. Why would you? So 8 laps is, well, 7 probably for the first stint, because you've got to factor in the rolling lap as well. And then we'll probably be doing 8 laps onward. And then it depends really what problems are out on the circuit and whether it is worth weaving in a little bit of strategy here and there. But I do remember Paul's basic rule for this race is go long all the time. Just keep pushing as far as you can into the stint, get to the final couple of hours and see where you are, and then maybe start to think about back timing. But then the pendulum switches around, and as I said, focuses on the end of the race and those 70 minutes that are still to elapse.
Yes, I think it was possibly 4 years ago when I said that, and it's one of those things that's kind of come back to haunt me, like a kind of politicians. Because various people over the years have been in contact with me to say, is that really right? Just go as long as you can. And of course, the trouble is you need to factor in at some point that everybody knows that's what the strategy is. So if you've got a car that's quicker than everybody else, not a problem, because you can win the race on pace. If your car isn't as quick as somebody else's, then the only way that you can win a race like this, these things work out, is on strategy, by being clever in your pit calls. So you then have to start taking risks. So yes, Johnny, the basic rule is go as far as you can into your fuel as you can. If you can save fuel, but basically just go as far as you can in every tank full. However, if there is a lot of Code 60 out there, if you're not able to go at optimal speed on the circuit, then it is sometimes worth coming in to add some fuel to the car so it can then go longer later in the race when the conditions are more suitable for fast laps.
Great to see that the Ford Mustang GT is out on the circuit. This is the one that had an engine failure for the OVR Racing Cologne team, and Oliver Sprungman, I think, was at the wheel at the time. It's now got Alexander Muller at the wheel. We've got an Alex Muller in the race for Fricadelli Racing and an Alexander Muller, but they're not the same driver. I had to look that up. He's getting some laps in for car 109. I haven't actually checked to see how many sessions this car's done. It might be the first one back after the engine repair.
It's an interesting paint job as well. Do you remember you used to get those 3D pictures in papers where you had to wear those glasses with green, with blue and
Magic Eye, it used to be called, I think.
Blue and the fake 3D.
Yeah,
it looks like a test pattern for that. It's got white, but then it's got that exact colour of sort of red and that exact colour of blue, which you go, oh yes, it's leaping out at me.
If you stare for long enough, you'll see galloping horses along the unicorn, beach.
Yes.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's a real camouflage type livery, but it doesn't work in the forest. It needs to have several zebras behind it.
Yes, he's basically got the African savannah look on the car.
Yeah. So yes,
it's taking it easy, isn't it?
It could hypnotise you if you look too long at it, but it makes a wonderful noise. He is taking it easy, Alexander Muller, certainly, as it thunders its way.
That's not a criticism. That's what I'm doing.
Certainly not.
It's just been rebuilt.
Thundering its way out of the Kleiner carousel. And an awful lot of torque, you would think, on that Mustang. But again, powered by this biofuel. I don't know what it's made from, sadly, but what I do know is that these 3 cars in the AT class have to fuel in their own little separate lay-by before you get to the pit lane proper. There's sort of a cutout, and you turn right after the speed limit bit, and there's space then for refueling. But
I think it's not because it's dangerous, just because it doesn't get dispensed by a normal pump.
Correct. Yeah, by the supermarket type pumps. Yeah. I'm not sure whether if all 3 pitted on the same lap together, whether you'd have to wait and there'd be a chance of triple stacking.
But they're 3 very different classes, aren't they?
Yes.
Therefore, I'm sure they would expect that within 8 laps they'd be separated.
Probably so.
Obviously, what happens is they go horribly wrong, and they're all turn up together, going, "Oh, what's going on?"
Yeah. I mean, they're all in the same class, but I think what they'll do is find other cars in the race to compete against, because, like you said, their speeds will be very different. You've got 2 Porsches and this big Ford Mustang GT heading now towards Tiergarten. and about to punch its way back onto the Grand Prix track. But I mean, so much standing water now at the end of the lap. I'm not surprised Alexander Muller is taking it easy through here, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him venture to the right. No, of course he can't do that because that bit's coned off. I've already described that. So no option to come into the pits. He'll have to do a Grand Prix lap at the very least, and then come in if he chooses to do so.
Yeah, interesting. We can now see the rain on the cameras in the Grand Prix section. So actually, it's not wet from being precipitation prior to this particular session. It's carried on coming down, and actually looking now at what's coming more of the front wheels and the rear wheels, it is getting a bit boat-like out there in some of the lower parts of the Grand Prix circuit, and that incredibly awkward section there where you cut out the Mercedes arena at the Grand Prix Stracker of the Nürburgring, and it's just the strangest combination of corners to get. I don't know why. I'm not quite sure why. You've got a 15-16 mile track. Why are you cutting out 400 yards? What does that possibly give you?
Why?
Oh, go on.
Paul knows, yeah.
Oh, well, you know as well, don't you?
Yeah, but no, go on, Paul. Tell him.
No,
tell
you
him.
do it. You're next to it.
I think it's because for paddock space, because the Mercedes arena, that extra bit around the right, actually allows Formula 4 to be here this weekend, because that's where all their trailers are. They're parked up on the track. So, and of course, normally this race runs or has run with 250 cars. And to enable all of those cars to be to have accommodation in the paddock, you have to run with a Yokohama S, as it's called, that right and left flick, which is very awkward. When you've got the start group that's going to include 44 cars, and they've all got to find space for one another. Often 5 abreast down to there. Because
normally, of course, you go in the first corner of the Nürburgring, it's a very tight hairpin. You accelerate back away again. You've got the Mercedes arena is quite open. Whereas this cut through, because that's what I'm going to call it. I'm going to get a name. It's a cut through.
It used to be called the Haug Hook.
What, Norbert Haug?
Yeah.
Oh, I love Norbert. Norbert's great. He's great. Norbert was fantastic. There's a story about him and eggs I can't tell you. Anyway, so Norbert, the Norbert Haug Hook, that's in now. But the problem is, you come down the first corner, and therefore all it turns into effectively just a 90-degree right, because you affect your shot is straight off the apex of the hairpin. You would take actually you go straight. That becomes the apex next corner. But you notice everyone, because they can't quite get it, they tend to run very wide on the exit of the Haug Hook, and then someone cut the inside. They'll cut back again. It's just recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
But okay, it's paddock space.
Indeed. But you then get cars, as you say, coming out of that bit of track at weird angles, different angles, and often we've seen the most innocuous accidents with cars colliding, spinning out, and then there's Armco barrier on driver's left, and that can finish a race sometimes in the opening hour.
I'm kind of hoping they're all going to be sensible, but to me, having not seen it before, that first corner, if it's damp, does seem like it potentially could go quite badly wrong. But you know, these are professional racing drivers at the zenith of their skills with fantastic professional racing machines. Obviously, they're going to completely correct. There'll be no issues whatsoever.
We will see. There's only one way to find out. 3:30 later on today. Actually, our countdown to green is from 2:15 Central European Summertime, an hour before if you're in the UK. A moment to go. Fabian Schiller in the number 9 car, powering his way up out of the Dunlop hairpin on the Grand Prix circuit. I don't think there's anything really to worry about there, overtaking one of the Bio Concept Porsches. By the way, fastest time in this session, a 9:47.316. There's indication as to how far off we are from Thursday morning's times when Marco Mappelli was able to set an 8:11. We're over a minute and a half slower than that in these treacherous conditions. But that was Lucas Stoltz last to drive the number 4 car, which of course is the car that will start from pole position later on after Mauro Engel's exploits last night, sharing that car with Lucas Stoltz last in the car in this session, Manuel Metzger and Adam Christodoulou. Martin Ragginger, who's been circulating in the 44 car pretty much for the whole session, earlier on did a 9:53.8. He's second fastest. Jörg Bergmeister for the KCMG Porsche, third quickest, 9:54.9. That time's just been set actually by Jörg. And another car now in the pits is the number 6 Mercedes, and that is the Müller car. I'm still trying to work out which of the Müllers is in which car, and that is the Dirk Müller, thank you, car number 6, having set a 9:55.301. Otherwise, Paul, I mean, I really think we can't read a great deal into these times, purely because it is warm-up, and you don't really know what the priority was for each of the teams here, how much fuel was on board and what they were trying to achieve for the hour-long session.
Exactly. So, just to round off the fast time there in the number 4 HRT Mercedes, it was actually Manuel Metzger, the guy who set the 9:47.316, which was the fastest lap of the session. So Metzger. No, I think there isn't a lot that people like us observing will have learned from that. I'm sure the teams will have been learning a lot. Heard from Lars Kerr that they're very unhappy with the handling of their Porsche, and they just can't seem to get the handling quite right. And they've been trying to chase that one down. Maybe as a result of that session, they've managed to tie something down. And as I say, that would have been the objective for most of the teams, I would have thought, during the session, and hoping that they'll be able to find something out. But I think really, I said earlier on, what you need to do based upon your own knowledge of drivers is just look down and see where the very consistent teams are, and the drivers who are going to be able to keep it out of trouble. I mean, I didn't realise that Nick hadn't actually covered a Nürburgring 24-hour race, but it's I look forward to talking to you afterwards, Nick, to see your impressions. But it's amazing how the Nürburgring will take prisoners all through the night. There'll be a car that maybe gets away, maybe even get as far as a lap ahead of the field, and then it'll have an accident. You'll think, but blimey, that car was going so well, they didn't have to be pushing at all. But they'll have an accident because there is always something that can go wrong. And I mean, you've seen enough of them, Johnny. There's always been something that's gone wrong overnight at some point. And then into the morning, the last few hours, that takes its own toll on cars as well. Yeah.
I mean, I've mentioned this already during this year's coverage, but that moment for Maximilian Goertz, who was flying in the Mann-Filter Mercedes last year, steering broke after Marciello in the previous stint, about 2 hours prior, had a very slight bit of side-to-side contact with another car. And actually the big problem for that car didn't manifest itself until there was another driver in it, and we were 120 minutes further on. But because the steering all of a sudden went, that pitched him into the wall, no warning whatsoever, and the car was out, and it was so strong. And then that's one example of probably hundreds that we've had through the years where you think, I'm pretty confident this car's going to win now, and then the narrative just changes again. I think there is way more jeopardy here than we get at Le Mans. We talk about Le Mans being the crown, the jewel in the crown as far as endurance racing is concerned, but this is just, for me, a 24-hour race on another level.
Well, you're threading the needle for, what, 11 or 12 of the 15 miles. You are just threading, and every single corner is out to get you.
Yeah.
Whereas at Le Mans, you are, in many ways, because it's a different challenge entirely. In many ways, your biggest challenge, if you're one of the quicker, is about traffic management. Obviously not going off. Traffic management with 100 cars. I know there's some massive closing speeds, but you have only got 100 cars in 15 miles. And sometimes with a huge closing speed, it's actually much easier, of course. There's always an issue. Think about in Le Mans, the GTEs and the P2s. At some points, they are making similar speeds. And it's not quite so bad in Le Mans, but certainly in normal track, it's an issue. Here, if you are so much faster than some of the, like a Hyundai or a low-spec old Cayman, it makes it much easier to pick your spot to get past them, and you don't get the frustration of being held up. Like, I've got to get past. That you get with the in Le Mans. So. It is. I think, in a way, I think in Le Mans you're battling the field, and here you're battling the track.
Yes, that's a very good point. Closing speeds have been somewhat of a moot point over the last few years. One or two teams not happy about, I think, the difference in performance between the GT3 and the guys in the Porsche Carrera Cup class SP7 because of changes in balance of performance, and actually one or two teams saying we don't want to do any more VLN/NLS racing because of that. But yes, it's about knowing where your car is the strongest, and they're just patient. I mean, patience is a huge thing around this place, knowing not to force the issue until sometimes you get onto the Dottinger Höhe, where that's your classic overtaking point. You've got the slipstream, you've got, relatively speaking, a wide bit of circuit, But then when you've got battling GT3 cars at the head of the order, I think, you know, to end the lap with practically a mile-long straight and all that slipstream is great, because you might have an overtake for the final few corners of the race, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. When you actually get onto the real meat of the Nordschleife, and you're in a similarly powered, similarly driven car, it becomes a single line circuit, you know, and there is very little point forcing it during all those forest-based corners, and you might stick your nose out just to worry them slightly. But yeah, but the back end of the track, and obviously the Grand Prix circuit, is where you've really got a chance of getting past. And of course, the point about slipstream, you have to make sure you slipstream late enough, not get slipstream back again, or put them in a position where they can get you into the hairpin in the first corner of the Grand Prix circuit. So, you know, I'm interested to see that. I'm interested to see how patient GT3 drivers can be. It's not normally one of their best qualities.
That's true. Yeah, and it has to be slowly brought into their personality as a nature of racing around this place. Aston Martin just been overtaken there, I noticed. Now, that will be the Garage 59 car, which I'm having to remind myself which class that is in this year. It's SP8T, because those cars turbocharged these days. The Vantage AMR, Johnny Adam, Darren Turner, Chris Goodwin and Alexander West, the lineup in car 59 with its white and blue colours.
I used to work with Chris Goodwin.
Okay.
Chris worked in the very beginning of F1 Digital. So
Right.
in 1996, when he was coming out of British GT, before he got his massive contract with McLaren, which has now become a massive contract with
Aston
Martin. Yeah, believe it or not, he was doing pit lane interview in mid '96. I remember him doing it with us we did it in Japan together. And obviously, to me, it was the greatest thing I'd ever done. And to him, it was the worst thing he'd ever done as a racing driver. He said, I never want to do it again. But he's great. He's a really good guy.
And somebody who probably goes even further back with Chris Goodwin is Paul Trustwell.
I was going to say, can I plug a book?
Yeah.
Chris's dad has written a book called Doctor on the Grid, Dr. Tony Goodwin. So you don't have to be that old, because I don't regard myself as being that old. But
I didn't say you were old, Paul. I just said you were going a little bit further back than the mid-90s with Chris.
Exactly. Thank you. So no, it's called Doctor on the Grid. It's by Tony Goodwin, and it is a great insight into how to go motor racing in the 1950s and into the 60s. Although Tony's career went on into the 80s as well, which is all covered in the book. On a doctor's salary, basically, and supplemented by writing articles for Autosport magazine. He would use the fee that he got paid by Autosport to write a race report and then go and race in the race. It's a lovely book. I recommend it thoroughly. And yes, I mean, apparently Chris has a book in the pipeline, so looking forward to that as well.
I'm pretty sure he won't mention the Austrian airport incident. That's fine.
Pretty tight going into the first corner, with three cars doing very different things. One coming back onto the track from the pit lane, which was the Glickenhaus, car 704, and the number 9 Mercedes, which is still being driven by, or now being driven by Raffaele Marciello, who set the 3rd fastest time last night. And the car in the middle was a Black Falcon Team Techstar Cayman, it looked like. Black Falcon are here as a entrant name. Remember that cars that we may be familiar with being connected with Black Falcon are actually Team HRT cars, but that's a rebranding of the team as I understand it. But proper Black Falcon named cars further down the entry, where for instance they're running a couple of Caymans, and I think, are they running that crossover car as well, the number 35? Yes, Team Identica have this car that sort of sits, as the checkered flag is shown, by the way, at the end of a 60-minute warm-up session. Porsche's new machine, new toy, is the car that sits somewhere between a Porsche Carrera Cup car and the full house GT3 machine. So it's a 911 GT3 Cup MR, still with the Carrera Cup engine, but a little bit more aero on it, and it's got the big intakes on the front too. And runs an SP Pro car this weekend, because it's not technically an SP9.
Porsche are very fond of inventing new variants of the same thing and charging more money for it.
There's a GT2 already out.
The GT2 is, of course, a whole new class, isn't it? For cars with a lot more power, but a lot less downforce for gentlemen drivers.
Yes, I know. Well, they'll sell lots of units, I'm sure of that.
That's good.
Raffaele Marciello managed to get across the line before the checkered flag was waved. So this is a classic Nordschleife moment where a 60-minute session will probably become 70 because we've got to allow all the cars that are out in the woods to return. And Maxime Martin's on a bit of a charge as well in his number 31 Porsche. That's the Fricadelli racing machine that he shares with Lars Kern. And Maxime Martin also struggling massively with that understeer that we were describing for Lars not too long ago. Mathieu Jaminet was the guy that qualified that 31 car, but I'm afraid as far back as 18th position, he was the first car not to get into qualifying 2 last night. And Mirko Bortolotti out on track as well. I think the Audis are in a false position on the grid, certainly the number 3 car for Mirko, the Italian, because they just couldn't get the tyre choice right.
Yeah, I mean, in those changeable conditions, and it's not like, it's something you've got to carry that poor choice for 10 minutes or 9.5 minutes and 15 miles. And it's, if you think about, well, I've made a bad choice of tyres. This is on a normal track, it's going to cost me 2 or 3 seconds. Well, that's 25 seconds gone straight away because you're just doing 5 laps effectively. And it is you're on a knife edge once the track gets damp. How damp is it? Is it damp enough for full wets? Is it damp enough for intermediates? Is it cut slicks? And that is a kind of a yes or no. And the only surprising thing for me is that they've decided to put them all out at the same time. If it is a toss up in the question, you've got, I think you had 3 cars in the game or 4 cars in the game. Well, at least send 1 or 2 out, something different. Because if you do the same thing, you'll get the same result. So sometimes just do something slightly different. If you're not, it just says to me they got bad advice because someone said that's the one. Yeah. And that wasn't the one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the various Audi squads are talking to one another, but they're very much separate entities as well. And I don't know at what level the tyre choice is made, but maybe a voice from above to say, well, you choose that, and hopefully we'll get a good result from at least one of the cars. But those guys, Mirko Bortolotti, Chris Meese in their Audis, and Augusto Farfus in his number 42 BMW from Team Schnitzer, they decided to effectively forego a part of last night's session and wait as long as they could. I mean, from the Brazilian perspective, Farfus, he was kept in the pit lane for an age with a guy on the nose of his car saying, wait. Then the tyres were called, and then he actually only completed, according to the timing sheet, 1 lap on one timed lap anyway, but it put him 6th, so he did the business and joined the other BMW alongside him, the Rover Racing car of Nick Yellerly, so to make it an all BMW 3rd row.
Yeah, the BMW is interesting because that's not a car we see much out and about outside of this sort of race, the Nordschleife race, that BMW M6 GT3. If we're honest, BMW have had a very confused product methodology of getting into GT3, obviously starting with the Z4, then they had the M8 version, they had the M6 version. We do believe that's all being condensed into the new M4 GT3 that should be out. I think it's been testing already and should be out next year, but they've never really, I've always got the impression they've never really known how to commit to it. They didn't feel they had the car, because the M6 is a big car, the M8 is a massive car. Similar to Bentley, it just means you have to do more weight saving, but you still always have the issue where you're pushing a big brick through the wind. They've now concentrated on going on to the M4, which is a nice medium-sized coupe. I mean, it's got a horrible mouth, but hey-ho. Probably good for air intakes. Yeah. But so it's interesting to see those M6s doing well, because you don't even think of BMW in GT3.
No, I suppose in the States you've got Turner Motorsport that running GTD. There's another one in that class as well. No, that's the M6. Yeah, okay, there is only one GT3 car. The GTLM car is the M8.
I thought they had an M8 GT3 at one point. Wasn't someone else running one independently?
No.
Oh, well, I see.
Not to my knowledge. The M4 is the GT4 car, the M6 is the GT3, and the M8 is the GTE. And I always thought that was clever branding from BMW, but maybe it's a bit of indecisiveness,
actually.
Initially,
it was the Z4 that was GT3.
Yes.
And now it's the M4 is the GT3.
Yeah, and you've not really got the consistency in car size and the sales point, you could say. Effectively, the new BMW Z4 in this race is going to be the Toyota Supra, which is built alongside that car in Graz in Austria.
Because the M4s are all convertibles and the Toyotas are all fixed head. That's the difference between the two cars. They share parts, but that's the delineation between them.
Right.
Every M4, every Z4 will be a convertible, and every Toyota will be a fixed head.
But the Supra with the BMW engine.
Yep. And the underpinnings and the chassis and the hard points. Yeah. But that's how you make cars these days.
Indeed. Yeah, they're made alongside one another on the same production line pretty much. But great to have for 2020 this Toyota GR Supra GT4, which runs in that division. Nick's typing in M8 GT3 and getting pictures of the GTLM car, because that's with the green numbers on the side.
Yeah, that's red numbers.
And that's red numbers because that's the colour at...
The images are saying M8 GT3.
No, but that's the red backing
okay.
you get in the IMSA Championship.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone's done one. Barry.
All right.
Barry in his garage somewhere in Dusseldorf.
I'm sure somebody's built a cardboard version of it, definitely.
I think I'm showing the limitations of Google search here.
The BMW M6, by the way, in NLS this year has already taken 2 victories way back at the start of the season, which wasn't quite as early as we were all expecting. To date was that race, 27th of June, a victory for David Pittard and Mikkel Jensen in the number 34 car. They're racing this weekend. And then at NLS 4, another victory for the M6, Nicky Katzberg and Steff Dusseldorf, both in the 4-hour races. I am aware that first cars across the line in NLS this year didn't necessarily go on to win the race, because there have been 1 or 2 disqualifications. I think 2 of the 5 races actually have had that way of the results. René Rast, is that right, Paul?
Yes.
Yeah. René Rast about to complete the lap. So what do you know about Audi, dictating tyre choice to their customer teams, like Phoenix, like Lance Motorsport?
I'll tell you what has happened in the past, and I'll tell you what I think is happening this year, which is that Audi customer service provide to all of their teams various services. One of those is a weather forecasting service. And one of those is kind of a man at the end of the phone who will say what's going to happen. So, you're Wolfgang Lant. You look at the weather forecast picture, which Audi is supplying you, and you say, how quickly is that going to come in? And so you then get on the radio to the man in the Audi customer services weather expert department and say, how quickly is the weather coming in? He gives you an answer, and you make your decision based on that. Nobody at Audi customer service will tell Land Motorsport or Phoenix or Car Collection what to do in terms of putting on which sort of tyre.
So all the information's given to them, and then they can do with that what they wish, effectively, and they are free to make their own decisions. The number 3 car down at the Dunlop hairpin, that is the Mirko Bortolotti car. And with the checker flag now being waved, he's obviously just crossed the line. He gets a slowing down lap around the Grand Prix Strecker, and then we'll duck back into the pits at the end of a 60-minute session, which sees the number 4 car at the top, which is the HRT Mercedes, a time set by Manuel Metzger, although Lucas Stoltz did a couple of laps towards, well, actually probably only 1 lap, because the car completed 2 timed laps, I can see, and the 9:47.3 was the better of the 2, set by Manuel Metzger. Raffaele Marciello has just completed his session, and the last lap he did was the best, a 9:47.8, which puts the number 9 car second fastest, ahead of a solid block of cars already in the pits and trying to search out some shelter. 31, Maxime Martin for Fricadelli. That car was a Maxime Martin time, 3rd position, a 9:53.4. Earlier on in the session, Martin Ragginger did a 9:53.809 for the 44 Falcon Motorsport tyred car, and sponsored car, of course. Jörg Bergmeister for KCMG on the Michelin tyres, number 18, did a 9:54.9. Dirk Muller for Mercedes, car number 6, 6th quickest, 9:55.301, and that time was set right at the end of the session as well. Lucas Auer in the number 98 car. That car earlier on did a 9:55.5 to put it 7th. Dennis Olsen, that car's running again, which is great to see, because sadly in qualifying 2 it had a problem at Callan-Hart. We heard it was mechanical, but the 19 car at least has done 4 laps in this morning's warm-up, and the best of those are 9:56.6. Philip Ellis, the German-born British driver, 9th fastest in car number 2, a 10 minutes flat, pretty much 10 minutes .180 of a second, and in 10th position was the number 5 car, and that was being driven by Michele Beretta for Phoenix Racing. That makes it an Audi, and that finished in 10th place. So we got Mercedes, Porsche up there in warm-up, BMW 7th place with Luki Auer doing the time, 9th fastest for another Mercedes car, number 2. The Audi of Beretta 10th. The Glickenhaus finished 11th in warm-up, but 19 seconds slower than the fastest car. and a little further down, the Ferrari, and that's not the Ferrari that's going to start on the front row. Car 16, the Halapadgid Ferrari, finishing just outside the top 16 positions. Paul, can you tell from your perspective whether the 26 actually did any laps? That's the Octane 126 Ferrari that will start from the front row.
Yes, number 26 had Simon Trummer, Jon Grossman and Jonathan Hershey all driving it during the session. The only driver who didn't drive it was the man who put it on the front row, Luca Ludwig. But they were out and they did do a number of laps, but none of them was both ends of the lap starting across the start-finish line.
Yeah.
So they would come into the pits at either the beginning of the lap or the end of the lap.
All right, thank you for that, Paul. We will hear from you later on, I'm sure, during our countdown to green. We are back live at 2:15 Central European Summer Time, 1:15, of course, in the UK, for the full build-up. A warm-up lap around this place. The green flag lap takes 20 minutes, so we'll be waving the cars off at 3:10 ahead of a 3:30 start. It's a on the half-hour race start, just as the 24 Hours of Le Mans was last weekend. But nearly 50 cars, I reckon, making it out into warm-up, and the checkered flag then was waved. And thankfully, nobody's had a massive drama. And those that did have difficulties yesterday, for instance, the Dennis Olsen Porsche, great to see that out. And that's where warm-up is important. If you've had mechanical problems in qualifying, at least it gives you that little bit of shakedown. So join us later on for the full build-up of the 48th edition of the 24 Hours of the Nürburgring, right here on RS1, part of the Radio Show Limited network of channels. My thanks to Paul Truswell and Nick Damon. From Johnny Palmer, see you later. Bye for now.